Yeah, Frank here has got his own billiard room.
Yes, it's what do you call it, Kramer?
Billiard room.
No, not billiard, not the billiards. It was
billiards room.
Come on already. Come on, we call it the
place to be.
The place to be. Yes, the place to be.
Then I shall be there.
Now, it's time. Live and in living color.
The Grandy Man can.
Time to play the game.
Well, you always left me satisfied and smiling, so.
That's what she said.
Why do I want this? I want to make bank, bro. I want to get ass. I want to drive a Range Rover.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it is now time for the Place to Be Podcast. And now your hosts, Justin Rosero and Scott Criscolo.
Very nice, Mr. Criscolo.
And ladies and gentlemen, their opponents. Introducing first, from Venice Beach, California, weighing 251 pounds, this is Steve! Ladies and gentlemen, the following contest, the feature confrontation, it is for the WCW Heavyweight Championship. Introducing first, from Charlotte, North Carolina, weighing 237 pounds. He is a former holder of the Heavyweight Championship, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. And ladies and gentlemen, his opponent in this world title event. He is from Charlotte, North Carolina. He weighs 245 pounds, and he has held the title 11 times. Ladies and gentlemen, the legendary Nature Boy,
How you like me now? 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 Remember the time when I eat you up.
Place to Be Nation, welcome back to another great episode of the Place to Be Podcast. I am your co-host, Justin Rosero, and we are all jacked up here tonight because we have a great episode ahead of us. And of course, to get things started, I do need to bring in my PIC, Scott Criscolo. Scott, how you doing?
JR, I am, as I mentioned a couple of shows ago, to quote The Rock from the Attitude Era, I am geeked this evening. This is an awesome show, episode 121 of the Place to Be Podcast. It is gigantic. So enough of the bloviating. Let's dive right into it. And let's introduce our special third host of the evening. He is the purveyor of the history of WWE.com. He has been a contributor to our show numerous times. He is the man that lives in Flair country, but we call it Graham country. The purveyor of the history of WWE.com, Graham Cawthon. Welcome to the show.
I'm a purveyor. Thank you very much. I didn't know that was in my job title.
It is now.
Yes.
So as most of the nation knows, we've done a few interviews in the past. Of course, we spoke with John Walters. We've interviewed Eddie Edwards, Stevie Richards back in November. And tonight we had the pleasure of talking to one of the greatest, if not the greatest, wrestling ring announcer of all time, and that is Gary Michael Cappetta. Gary, thank you so much for joining us here tonight.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
So the format we're going to go with here is Graham being the true wrestling historian of the group. We're going to let him kind of drive the interview through your career, and Scott and I are going to kind of come in with some follow-up questions. And we just want to go through your career in the WWF, WCW especially, because that's my fondest memories of your work. That's kind of the age I was at when you were there in the early 90s. So that's what I'm really looking forward to. So I'm going to turn things over to Graham, and we'll get things started.
All right. Well, Gary, I have read your book, but I don't want this interview to be Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3. I do kind of want to hit on some of the bigger aspects from your career. And certainly before your career even started, I'd like to talk a little bit about how you became a wrestling fan. Because I think for those of us that grow up with it, those of us who get into it, I think those are some of the most interesting stories.
I think probably because how we perceive TV and entertainment was very different when I was a kid than today, because young people are exposed to so much so early. And I came across wrestling on television one night I was spinning the channels, and I came across something. I didn't know what it was. Just picture like a 9-10-year-old kid coming across what I saw as these scantily clad men, sweaty and rolling around the middle of a lighted area with people screaming on all sides. That's how I saw it. And I guess that's a very crude way of, looking at that. That was pro wrestling. And when I looked at it, I thought, I don't think I'm supposed to be watching this. And then Mom would walk in the room and I'd turn it off. And then she'd go out. And of course, I was like curious as all. And the next week I tuned in, and there were these 4 midgets doing the same thing. Now, to a kid, this was like perverted. This was perverse. I didn't know what to make of it. And of course, you lay something out there to a young person, especially, that they think they're not supposed to witness, and you've really caught their attention. And that's how I came across wrestling. And eventually, I just continued to watch it, and was just fascinated by the spectacle. And that's how I came across it.
It's funny because midget wrestling still freaks out Scott to this day. So
don't even get me started. I still enjoy Little Beaver and King Kong Bundy. That's how much I enjoyed midget wrestling.
We all do. About what age was that?
I was about 9 or so.
And you were living in New Jersey at the time?
Yes, I grew up in Kearney, New Jersey, northern part of the state.
Now, looking back on that, do you remember at all, in retrospect, maybe who you were watching, or what? I guess you were watching Capital Wrestling at that point.
Yeah, that's right. It was a program that emanated from Washington, D.C. Bruno Sammartino was the champion, and he was my favorite. He was my hero, and in some ways, he still is my hero. He was just different from everyone else who would come out and scream and rant and rave. The Graham brothers, the Kentuckians, Hans and Max Mortier, they were very big in tag team wrestling back then. And I was just fascinated by it all, and fortunate in years later, which we're talking about 25, 30 years later, to be working with these very people that I was watching as a little boy.
So at that point, when you're 9 years old, and you mentioned that it was something that, not necessarily your mom would approve of you watching, were there others in the neighborhood that you would get together with and watch it, or were you able to go to shows? Did your mom allow that?
Do you really think I would tell anyone that I was peeking in on something like that? It took me, a while to feel comfortable with what I was looking at. We didn't have ESPN. We didn't have the proliferation of even a whole lot of sports. There was football and baseball, and on weekends, and it was. I know I'm sounding ancient, but it was just a very different time, and I don't remember how I shared my fascination with this with other kids. I had a cousin who was also a big wrestling fan, and when I finally convinced my parents to bring me to a show, my cousin would go along. They actually wouldn't go to the show; they would just drop us off at the arena, and that's how I started.
What? Just out of curiosity, what arena?
Oh, at that time in northern New Jersey, there were many armories, National Guard armories.
Oh, yeah.
Patterson Armory, Jersey City Armory, Elizabeth Armory.
Oh, okay.
Newark Armory. It was before wrestling was in high schools, or, they used to use those facilities. And Willie Gilzenberg, who was the figurehead, the president of the Worldwide Wrestling Federation at the time, his office was in Newark, New Jersey. And so there was a lot of activity in the area where I lived.
Okay. So fast forward a little bit. How does that 9-year-old eventually get the guts and the I don't know what it is, but how is it that you get in the ring and actually begin commanding a crowd? Walk me through how that happened.
Well, commanding a crowd only comes with experience. But once I revealed little by little to people that I knew and was related to that I was fascinated by this, and once again, we're not talking mainstream. This was, I don't know I really don't know what to compare it to that we might have today.
But yeah, it's really hard to compare it to anything because back then local TV was where it was at back, in the 70s before the proliferation of cable in the 80s. So I don't think it is relatable to anything today, honestly.
Yeah, and then when I started to reveal it, I got such strange looks and strange reactions that then I think it became cool.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was like an anti what everyone else considered the norm activity. So I would be dropped off at arenas, throughout my childhood. Then when I began driving, I started to drive to shows, and that was when I was in college. And then toward the end of college, I decided that there had to be a way for me to go see the programs and not pay to get in. And so I thought, how could I be part of this? And I decided I can write. I was a pretty good writer, and I went to the offices of one of the magazines in New York City. I just bought a wrestling magazine, looked in the front, saw what the address was. It was the Ring Wrestling Magazine. I went, I talked to the fella, and convinced him to issue me a press pass. And that was in March of my senior year of college. And I wrote a couple of articles, interviewed Gorilla Monsoon, wrote an article about midget wrestling, and I got in for free, and sat at the timekeeper's table at ringside. And one night in Wildwood, it was the last weekend of June before the big 4th of July show. They didn't have a ring announcer, and I volunteered.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that was also it was your debut, but it was also the debut of Larry Sharp on that same show?
The next weekend was.
The next weekend was, okay.
Because I volunteered to announce, and I was wearing a T-shirt and jeans, and Willie Gilzenberg, who was doing the announcing from the floor, sort of looked at me curiously and said, "Yeah, you just stay here and do it." So no one ever got into the ring to announce until the next weekend. And for those that aren't familiar with the Jersey Shore, 4th of July is a huge attraction for hundreds of thousands of people to gather. So Wildwood was jammed the next weekend when they told me to come back. They asked, they said, "That was pretty good. Do you have any experience?" And I lied to them. I said, "Yeah, of course I do." And as I'm saying that, I'm saying to myself, please don't ask me what that experience is, because I obviously had none. Next week, I came back with a shirt and tie and a jacket over my arm. I would never get dressed to get into the ring the next weekend because I didn't really believe it was going to happen. And sure enough, they said, "Yeah, go get dressed over there," and I was in the ring. 4th of July, 1974.
Now, Gary, did you ever have any dream or desire to actually try and become a wrestler, or is your interest always in, behind the scenes or outside the ring?
Yeah, I was not an athlete as a kid growing up, so that wasn't even part of the idea of what I could do. There was no way that I wanted to be a referee because I just always seemed to get abused. So I didn't even have a design to be a participant, an announcer.
Right.
It was just at the spur of the moment. They didn't have anyone, and I said, "Yeah, I can do that."
Gary, did you when you first started? Did you have any when you were doing, got the articles and started to write and sit? Did you have any interaction with Vince Sr., or was he kind of off in the distance?
No, he never attended these smaller shows. He would only appear at the TV tapings, which I never went to, and at Madison Square Garden, where I never went to. Mm-hmm. So I never met him until I started announcing on television for them.
Now, skipping ahead, I mean, we talked about your debut as an announcer, but how does that lead to eventually doing several different venues and then eventually after that going on to television?
The key was Gorilla Monsoon. I did not know when I was announcing that Gorilla Monsoon was a part owner of the WWF. And I just looked at him as a wrestler. And I was never allowed in the locker room with the wrestlers because that was closed off to anyone who wasn't initiated into the business. Anyone that wasn't trusted, anyone outside of that brotherhood was not allowed. So I would have to change. If I didn't come dressed to announce, I had to change in a bathroom or in a side room or someplace else. So I never knew until the end of the summer, which, I had just graduated from college. I had found a teaching job, and when I finished, in Wildwood, I was announcing every week. There were wrestling shows every week in Wildwood. So when I first stepped into the ring, I didn't know how to step into the ring. I didn't know how to get through the ropes. I was like, and the fans saw me, and I was just like very funny to them because I was this very serious, awkward person in the middle of the ring, in the middle of these giants. So people began to taunt me and throw things at me, and they liked me. I was like another form of entertainment to them. And
were you intimidated by that at all?
Pardon me?
Were you intimidated by the crowd, not following in line, I guess?
I was just determined. I don't know what. I don't know. There was one night I was announcing, and I was introducing somebody, and all of a sudden I lost the sight of my right eye, and I didn't know what it was. But I just had this inner determination that I was just going to continue. I just ignored the fact that I went blind in one eye. And what had happened was that somebody had flipped a hot dog at me, and I was wearing glasses, and the hot dog had lodged between my eyeglasses and my head, and I didn't even know it.
Well, that's going to be a 1 in a million shot.
Wow.
The guy was good. He was good.
Yeah, impressive.
And so picture a kid. I mean, I was 21 when I graduated from college, and just picture that, just with a hot dog hanging off his head, and he does not acknowledge it. He doesn't stop what he's doing.
No selling.
But little by little, I began to get good at what I was doing. At least good enough that at the end of the year, Gorilla Monsoon called and asked if I wanted to continue with him, and I did. And I was teaching in the daytime and announcing at night.
I don't want to go too much off the tracks, but any good Gorilla Monsoon stories or any, personal anecdotes you can share with us? Because we're all big. I know the three of us are huge Gorilla Monsoon fans. He's the voice we all grew up with, watching wrestling, and I can still just put him on anytime and just, fall asleep peacefully with him in the background commentating a match. So, any good Gorilla stuff you can share with us?
Not anything, as far as funny, because he was like my godfather of wrestling. He was the reason that I continued to announce. I came to find out after working with him for 2 years, once again teaching in the daytime, announcing at night. What had happened? What the partners of the WWE did was they split the territory so that each partner promoted shows in different parts of the territory. And his part, he lived in New Jersey, was New Jersey, Delaware, and Eastern Pennsylvania. So therefore, I had a lot of work. I was working all the time with him. And so by the end of the second year, I came to find out that he was also the person that was in charge of their television tapings that went out across the WWF region, which were always done at the time in Philadelphia. So at the end of 2 years, Buddy Wagner, who was the announcer, stopped. I don't remember whether he was ill or he just stopped. And Monsoon brought me right in and gave me that slot. Number one, because by that time I had gotten pretty good at what I was doing. But also, number two, because I was his announcer, it elevated, me being on television, elevated all of his shows. So that, wherever he promoted, people saw that the TV announcer was there. And I didn't have a good relationship with the McMahons, so it was Monsoon who brought me in and kept me working as long as he had control.
You brought up an interesting subject there with the McMahons, and I want to touch on that. But before I do, I think it would be very important, I think, for us to touch on Chief Jay Strongbow, who just recently passed away. And when you came into the territory and began ring announcing, he was pretty much already an established top guy. Can you walk us through what his impact really was? Because for me personally, for as long as I've been watching wrestling, and I'm really not that old, but as soon as I started watching, he was already an agent. And I think for a lot of people in our age group, they either saw the tail end of his career or none of his career. How big a deal was Chief Jay as a wrestler, as a draw? When he came to the ring, when he came to your city, what did that mean for the house?
Mm-hmm. I don't, especially so soon after his passing, I don't mean to minimize his impact, but he was used more as like a second or a third tier headliner.
Right.
So that if Bruno Sammartino was headlining in Pittsburgh and there was a high school or college show down the road, and they needed another roster of wrestlers, he would possibly headline. And he was used more in the tag team realm than as a singles wrestler. But that being said, he had the ability to emotionally connect with the audience. If you stood back and you looked at what actually was being portrayed, I guess people believe that he was an Indian, but physically he was never impressive or imposing. And yet he was able to convince the fans that he could be a match for a 6'6" guy of muscle. So I give him his due in drawing the emotion of people and enlisting their support. But as a headliner for one of their top cities, unless he was very heavily supported, he was a very excellent backup guy or supporting co-main event guy.
From seeing, just as a follow-up, from seeing the crowds as they were and how they reacted to him, was there ever any potential to do more with him? Obviously, he worked with Superstar Billy Graham when he was champion, and he worked with the top-level heels when they were challenging Bruno and Pedro. But was there ever any talk of possibly, let's put the belt on Chief Jay and see how he does?
I wouldn't have been privy to those conversations at that time, but I would say as a close observer that I think it was amazing that they were able to have the success with him that they did, considering his lack of technical expertise in the ring, and who he was physically and how he was portrayed. I think they were incredibly successful with him.
And you mentioned your relationship with the McMahons, which, and I've spoken with a few folks that worked with the McMahons during that time, Jimmy Valiant among them, and it seems like almost across the board there is praise given to Vince Sr., and it's very rare that I seem to hear anything critical about him, but it sounds to me that he was a bit standoffish with you. Maybe to put it lightly.
Well, there was actually there was no need for him to befriend me. he was the top boss.
Mm-hmm.
But there was more animosity toward me from Vinny than there was from his father. But let me just give you an example of one of the few direct interactions I had with Vince Sr. I was paid very little to do what I was doing. And I believe at the time I was getting paid maybe $65 to announce their television shows. And when we came in to announce a television taping, we were doing 3 weeks of television in one night. So we would only come back once every 3 weeks and essentially take $65 divided by 3, and that's what I was being paid per television program. I thought I deserved more, and I had a bout with hepatitis, and I was out for a while, and Monsoon would call once in a while to see how I was doing, and it was only then that I realized the value that I offered to the promotion. And it was only then, as I was laying in bed from November through January, that I realized how much of my time I was devoting to announcing. And I decided by the end of my time being bedridden that I needed to make it more profitable than or it wouldn't have been worth it.
Mm-hmm.
So when I came back, I asked Monsoon for a raise for the house shows, and he immediately gave me a raise. It was like from $25, which was like a house show price, to $40. And then another year went by, and I asked him again, and right away he gave me the money. So I'm thinking to myself, how much money could I have been making if I had been smart from the beginning? Fast forward to the story with McMahon, and I decided I needed to make more money at the TVs. So I approached Vinny, and he said, that's not my job. You have to talk to my father. So I said, okay. And this was in Hamburg, Pennsylvania. And I went into this very little office that they had. Monsoon was there. Skolin was there. And Phil Zacco was there, who was another one of their partners. And I knocked on the door. Obviously, I was very nervous. I never would talk to this man. And I went in and I told him, I said, I think I deserve more money. And he looked at me and he said, I can't afford to pay you more. Now,
wow.
I know the guy's a millionaire.
Right.
I'm like a second-year high school teacher, and I'm making like $9,600 a year for teaching back then. And what do you say to him? I mean, he just says to me, I can't afford that. In other words, maybe from $65 bump me up to $75 or $100. I can't. So I had I turned around and I left. It was like I was speechless. At the end of the night, when I got my pay, there was $100 in there. And it continued for a while until I got another raise. So he couldn't say to me, yes, no problem. I think you do a good job.
Right.
That is one thing that the McMahons could never, ever say, to me at least. Good night tonight, Gare. You did a good job. You really put that over well, knowing that the main event wasn't going to be here and how you told the people that was going to happen. Never once, from 1974 to 1985, did any of the McMahons ever acknowledge my contribution to their organization.
And do you think that was their way of never empowering their employees in a way? So you can't go back and say, hey, you've told me, you approve of what I'm doing. You told me you like my, so as a way to almost neuter their employers, or employees rather, by not giving that positive feedback.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I also think that because during all of those years I was teaching, that I didn't need them. In other words, if they fired me, they couldn't hold that over my head,
right,
where, oh my God, how am I going to support my family? I need you, and I'll do anything you tell me to do because I need this job. What they didn't understand, and this is the sad part in the way I look at it, is that emotionally, I did need them. Financially, I didn't need them. But this was so important to me, and I was so proud of what I was doing, and it became so much of my identity that emotionally they had me, which in a way where you couldn't even compare to a financial hold on me. But money was all that mattered in their world, and so if they couldn't control me financially, then they couldn't control me, and that's how they looked at it. That's just my hypothesis.
Well, with that said, and I've heard this story so many times, but I would love to hear you tell it again. Would you share how you met Shane McMahon?
Yeah, that was once again.
Because I think that ties in perfectly with what you just said about his dad and grandfather.
You did read the book, didn't you?
I think I knew that from years ago, but yes, I did.
Okay. Yeah, it was. He was a teenager, maybe just a teenager at the time, and it was one of the very rare times that Vinny was at the Meadowlands for a house show, and New Jersey at the time was a very regulated state, a very regulated industry by the State Athletic Commission. So there would often be people sitting at the ringside table that I didn't know. I just always assumed they were either the son of a commissioner or whatever. So I didn't know Shane, and so here's this kid that's sitting next to me, and he started to ask me very pointed questions that I was uncomfortable answering in order to, quote-unquote, protect the business. And he just kept on peppering me with questions, and I was being very evasive with my answers. And the kid was getting frustrated. And finally, he just said to me, you know who I am? And I said, not really. Like in a way, like, and I don't really care. And he says to me, I'm Shane. I'm Vince's son. So when I heard that, now I decided that I was going to pepper him with questions. So I only got one out before I once again became speechless. And that was, I said, if you had your dad's job and you were in charge of everything that goes on here, what would be the most important thing that you've learned from your father? I said, because you probably talked about wrestling around the dinner table. I mean, that's all you hear. What would be the most important lesson that you've learned? And he said, and I can't give you the exact quote, but it was something along the lines of, never let your workers know how important they are to you so you can get away with paying them the least amount of money.
There you go.
And that's exactly what he said. And once again, the announcer was speechless.
Pretty blunt.
Now, that was at the Meadowlands, right? Is that what you said? Okay.
Yes.
Now, you were regular at the Spectrum. You worked the Meadowlands. What other, once you got to be on television, were established? What were the other major arenas that I guess fell into your territory?
Those were the major arenas in Monsoon's territory.
Okay.
So there was only one time that he sent me to Pittsburgh, and I think, and that was another story where I met another famous son. But I think that the reason for that was they were having a problem with the announcer out in Pittsburgh, and I just think it was to send him a message. Sort of.
That he can be replaced.
Yeah.
Interesting that they used you to tell that message instead of telling that message to you, which sounds like something that they would have no problem doing.
Yeah, well, we don't know the circumstances. Very often, a big arena announcer was tied into the commission in some way.
Oh, okay.
So sometimes their hands were tied as to who their announcer was.
Okay.
And in fact, legally, I wasn't even supposed to be announcing at the Spectrum. By law, you had to be a resident of Pennsylvania to announce there. But they paid someone off, and that's how I got to be licensed in Philly.
So many weird little quirks back then, huh?
Yeah.
With, local referees and announcers and stuff like that.
All the things that you read about that everyone thinks is fake is actually not. You know, like the commission makes up these rules, but it really is true. It's amazing.
Well, they would enforce rules when it was convenient for them.
Oh yeah.
And if there wasn't a rule that needed to be broken, then what reason would there be to have been paid off?
Right.
Right.
So
pretty much.
Well, with all those stories told about the McMahons, walk us through how you eventually decide, well, this isn't for me. I'm out of here.
It wasn't totally my decision. When Vinny became the owner of, I guess at that time it was the WWF, Monsoon lost his power. So Monsoon became very despondent about being forced to sell his shares to Vinny. And when he lost his power, I lost my position. And it became, no one ever fired me, and I never quit. I just simply, there were a couple of times they had canceled the show, didn't tell me, and I would show up and there was nothing happening. And then I just stopped going, and then Pro Wrestling USA happened. And I started to announce for Pro Wrestling USA, which was the combination of the AWA and the NWA, and their invasion into the Northeast. And for a few months, I announced, and I think I hold the distinction of being the only individual ever to work for the WWF, the AWA, and the NWA all at one time, because I would announce at the Meadowlands for both groups. And I was amazed that I never got a call from anyone from the WWF to tell me, you can't do that, or as long as you're doing that, you're gone.
Mm-hmm.
I would, it would be every other week because they would have monthly shows, each group. And I decided that going out to announce and introduce wrestlers from two competing operations and saying that this is the best wrestling in the world diminished my credibility, because I think that that is one of my biggest assets, or was one of my biggest assets at the time, was people believed me, believed what I said. So I just decided I needed to pick. And so I stopped going to WWF shows.
Now, Gary, obviously, as far back, I started watching in 1983. So, obviously, when I used to watch Channel 9 in Sea Caucus, that's where I first started watching shows. And obviously, as far as I can remember, Howard Finkel was the MSG announcer. Was he pretty much like Vince's guy? Is that why there was, the issues with announcing? Because, obviously, Howard was one of his earliest employees. And then obviously whenever there were Spectrum House shows, it was always, I guess, Mel Phillips, who had his nice, I guess, pink or banana colored tuxedo, whatever color tuxedo he had on that certain night. But so was there like those house announcers, and that's kind of what happened once Vince kind of took over everything? Like he had his guys in place. Is that kind of what happened?
Yes. Howard was the house announcer for, I want to say New Haven. Could have been Hartford, but it was in Connecticut.
Yeah.
And there was the house announcer in Madison Square Garden was state appointed, so they sort of had to wait for him to go away and needed to be replaced. And then when Vinny took over and that happened, he brought Howard right in. I'll give you another, I don't think this was in the book. I'll give you another example. You talk about Mel Phillips and the Spectrum. of how I stopped announcing in the Spectrum. This was another another clue that my days were numbered. One of the things that I would do at every Spectrum show was before intermission to announce the next card and tell people tickets are now on sale and then call for intermission. So I was in the middle of doing that, and when I did that, I was pretty broad with my announcing and, prancing around the ring and telling people and getting reactions from people. And in the middle of it, as I was close to the ropes, I felt something pulling on my pants leg. And I looked down, and it was Mel Phillips. Now, I'm in the middle of an announcement. So I thought, you know what I thought? I thought my mom or dad had passed away or something, because he says to me, they want you in the back. And I just said, oh, okay, I'll go. He said, no, now. He said, now. I said, okay. I gave him the microphone. He stepped in the ring. He continued to tell the folks who was going to be there the next time. Mm-hmm. When I walked to the back, Vinny was there, which was unusual. And he says to me, I don't need your services anymore. I said, what? He said, I don't need for you to announce anymore. I said, are you firing me, like, totally? Or he said, no. I just mean here at the Spectrum. I said, okay. And Monsoon was sitting there, and he wasn't saying anything. And I'm saying to myself, why couldn't you wait till the end of the night to tell me that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
But it was almost, I don't know, it was almost like rubbing your face into, that's how much he disliked me. And I never had a cross word with him, ever. But I think it's so odd, because he had so much power he had all the power in that world, that I think he somehow felt threatened by me. I don't know. Honestly, because he felt that because I didn't need him financially, that I might be too independent. I might start saying things around, the wrestlers, might get them thinking. I don't know what was in his head, but all I knew was that maybe he was showing his power over Monsoon and was using me.
Yeah, that's definitely possible.
Yeah, I could see that.
So, yeah, I mean, those were the most notable. You just heard the three most notable interactions that I've had with the three different generations of McMahons.
Now, before we move forward with your career, just wrestling at the time, as your time in WWF was starting to taper off, that is when they were really raiding the territories. The rock and wrestling era was starting. Hulk Hogan had ascended to the top of the mountain. What were your thoughts on the business in general at that time? Is that something you saw coming at all, being there at the time, or did that catch you off guard? Did you think it was good or bad for the business?
You mean the expansion and how
Yes.
the face of wrestling changed?
Yes, yep. And how they started raiding, AWA and NWA, bringing in guys like Roddy Piper, Paul Orndorff, the big Mean Gene, all the talent influx they had, yeah.
I wasn't totally surprised because of an incident that happened that led to a lawsuit that I filed against WWF at the time. And that was, we were in a small high school, and the agent that night was Arnold Skoland. And he came in like it was like any other night. He opened his briefcase, and he put a stack of papers on a table that was in the high school locker room. And he made an announcement that everybody, before you leave, you need to take one of these and sign it and give it back to me. And everybody did what they were told to do. I took it and I glanced at it, and it turned out to be a contract. And I decided I wasn't comfortable signing it. So I put it in my gear, and I never returned it. What that contract was, now this was at a time, it was one of the last years where if you went to a wrestling show, you pretty much, the only thing you could buy as far as souvenirs would be like a blurry old black and white picture on the other side of a program. Well, when I got it home and I read it thoroughly, in essence, you relinquished all of your rights to any merchandise from that day and forever and anywhere in the world, and they would pay you, I forget, it was a penny or a dollar, it was something to make it legal. So when it happened, I mean, that just showed, as I look back, how Vince knew that he was going to start marketing a product that had never been marketed in the same way before. And he just wanted to be sure that nobody, unless he decided to break that contract, would profit from it but him. So I never signed the contract. And then that's when the Coliseum video started coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on, I think it was like 11 of the first set of Coliseum videos. Then they put out a Hulk Hogan workout like it had like stretchy bands and maybe a couple of weights, and with it came an audio tape where the Hulkster was going to tell you how to work out. But on the tape, they had lifted an announcement that I had done from a broadcast to introduce Hulk Hogan. So I had sued them because I had never signed that contract. So no, I wasn't totally surprised with the evolution. Yeah, I mean, who could ever believe that it would become, such a prominent pastime today?
Right.
But when it began to evolve, I wasn't surprised.
Was the lawsuit after you left?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I had left, and then they started to issue those
Right.
Coliseum videos.
So it's almost like you were the forebearer to the Jesse Ventura lawsuit for the royalties, which is the really well-publicized one.
Yes. That would have been in the mid-'80s, and I had left them in '84.
Okay.
I had that Hulk Hogan set, by the way, Gary, just to let you know.
It didn't work.
Really?
No, I realized I enjoy the ice cream bars more than the weight, so.
We all realize that.
Well, skipping ahead a little bit, you leave the WWF. You're working for Pro Wrestling USA, and as for, I don't know, as good as it may have looked on paper, it did not last. What happens when the Crockett's and Gagne say, "I'm done. This isn't working. You guys go your direction. We'll go ours"?
I continued to work for both of them individually. I did pay-per-views for both organizations. When the AWA began, and you guys probably would know better than me, but I think the AWA wrestling show on ESPN was the first pro wrestling on ESPN. Do you guys know if that's true or not?
I'm pretty sure it was, because I remember starting to watch AWA on ESPN like in early '85.
That's right.
And ESPN was only around for about 5 years at that point, so I don't think they had wrestling. And then they did World Class. They kind of bounced back and forth. They did They did AWA till probably probably through '90, because they re-aired some of them. I had taped them off of ESPN Classic, so really almost to the end for them. And then they had World Class on there too. So it was definitely, and then Global after that. So I'm pretty sure, Gary, that AWA was first, and that was probably like early '85.
That's very cool, because then that's another first. But that was '85, and they started that program in Atlantic City. And I think it was Tuesday night slams and jams. It was roller derby and wrestling, an hour and a half of each. So I was working for the AWA, and then I did the Great American Bashes for the NWA and the Crockett's. So I continued to work for both.
When you say the NWA, do you mean nationally or just basically in the Northeast to start with?
Well, they got to know my work from Pro Wrestling USA, and in the beginning it was local, and then I think their first Clash of Champions, they weren't happy with the ring announcer who was one of their main guys, and probably like family to them, but
Mm-hmm.
It just didn't translate, maybe. So then they started to bring me in for the Clash of Champions, and then I did Great American Bash pay-per-views.
In Baltimore.
Yes, that's right. And then I started doing monthly Baltimores, too. And we did there was that Jim Crockett tag team tournament.
Mm-hmm.
Crockett Cup.
The Cup, right, where Magnum TA came back. The Triple Tower of Doom, that was crazy.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to mention, Graham, I want to bring back to something, Gary. You had mentioned Howard Finkel quickly. Actually, being from New Haven, that's where I'm from, he was actually an usher at the New Haven Coliseum, which was kind of like my home arena. Before he actually worked for Vince, he worked for the Coliseum. He used to be an usher. My brothers used to see him walking up and down the aisle during Nighthawk games. So that was kind of his.
Was he an announcer there too, or no?
No, I think he was just an usher. I don't think he announced. He probably did, but I know he was an usher at least till like 80. I think he said on. They did a
That's a
documentary.
huge jump.
Yeah,
to go from an usher to the ring announcer at MSG.
Yeah, he was on. He did TV for Vince too. I think, but I know he said he was an usher there when they opened in '72. I think the Coliseum opened. I wanted to ask you, Gary. Obviously, during this '80s, you were obviously working for all three companies, and you were dealing with obviously all the top, the guys that owned it. You talked about how it was with Vince. Compare working with Vern to working with Vince. We hear a lot of things about Vern on their DVD and other things. Did you have interaction with him, or did he pretty much stay in the Midwest?
No, I had interaction with Vern. Vern was like the total opposite of Vince. When he walked into the room, it was like a very successful national politician. He had a presence about him. And I know I've heard many of the stories that you're referring to that were negative about Vern, but I have to say that he always treated me really well, and he always showed respect to me when he didn't have any reason to do that. For instance, he had flown me out to Minneapolis to do Wrestle Rock, which I guess that was a pay-per-view. And he knew that the next day my flight was a little later, and his office called me in the morning and said, "Yeah, why don't you? We want to come pick you up, bring you over to the office, show you around, bring your gear, and then we'll get someone to take you to the airport." Like that. It was a really nice thing. A little side story about that was, business-wise, he wasn't very competent. And I believe that his success with the AWA was because he had no competition. So he was no match for Vince when Vinny went national. Give you a really short story. So they pick me up at my hotel, and they take me downtown to their office, and I walk in, and they're huddled around a TV monitor. And my recollection is Vern and his son and Larry Zbyszko and their TV guy. And Vern is saying, "Okay, freeze it." And then a few seconds later, they would go again, "Okay, freeze it." And what he was doing, he didn't believe the count from the night before at the arena. He thought there were more people there than they were paying him for. So he was counting the fans in their seats, like by section.
Wow.
Which is like very strange.
Yeah, slightly.
Very
a little
strange.
unusual. Yeah.
Things weren't going so well with the ESPN show, and one night at the end of the night, he asked me what I thought of the show, and I really didn't think it was a very good show, and I was quickly trying to think of how to be honest, but not lose my job. So I gave him, a couple of my thoughts, and then I said to him, "And Vern, what do you think?" And he says, I don't know. I've never seen it. So
Really?
It was,
Yeah, not good.
Yeah. Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
Out of touch. It's out of touch.
Yeah. But that being said, he was very nice to me. When they, and then when they, I think it was from August until the end of December, we did the ESPN show in Atlantic City, and then they moved it to Las Vegas. But
Right.
I still continued to do their whatever pay-per-view they asked me to do. That's what got me my full-time job in WCW, was working for Vern.
Well, speaking of WCW, how was the work environment there compared to AWA and the WWF? Was there still that strong divide where you kind of came in as an outsider?
So we're not WCW then, you're talking NWA.
Well, NWA, yeah, Crockett, NWA.
Crockett. I was, by that time, even with the WWF, I mean, after, several years, there was not that, in other words, keeping me separate from the roster. Is that what you're referring to? That didn't happen in any of the organizations after I became established.
Okay.
That was just the first, maybe year and a half, when I was a kid and I started with Monsoon.
Well, how was the working relationship different in the different territories from your experience?
Well, I think I gave you a pretty good view with the McMahons and then with Gagne. With the Crockett's, I dealt with Gary Jester. It was mostly just a hello and a nod with the Crockett's. I didn't have much interaction with them when they owned the organization, and then even after when they continued to work with the organization when it became WCW. So I didn't have... the only one that I had a problem with was actually not a force in the wrestling, like Night to Night, when that was the... I think her name was Frances. It was the daughter with the Crockett's. She had a pretty... her attitude, it was... She sort of talked down to people. But I didn't have much interaction with the Crockett's, just from my observations.
Well, you mentioned Gary Jester. Now, he promoted Baltimore, correct?
Yes. And
So
he
what?
also promoted Pro Wrestling USA in the Northeast. That's how I got to know him.
Okay, and so from your experience with working with him in Pro Wrestling USA, he brought you into Baltimore, and I guess that's what eventually led to your full-time job there?
My full-time job with who?
With the Crockett's.
Actually, I never worked full-time with the Crockett's. It was only after they sold to Turner
Okay.
that I began to work full-time. Gary, in fact, when Pro Wrestling USA came into the Northeast, they had scheduled, I want to say 5 dates, maybe it was 4 dates, around the boroughs of New York, and then the last night would have been at the Meadowlands. And Gary, I didn't know this at the time, but Gary had told all of the local promoters, to line up your local talent, and we'll bring in the referee and the wrestlers. And I had worked with all of those local promoters through Vince for years. So they, one by one, they all contacted me, and for me to announce for them. And then when we got closer to the date, like a week before those 4 or 5 dates, one by one they called and started canceling. And what I came to find out happened was when Gary Jester heard that they had hired me, he didn't want me to be the announcer because I was obviously the face of the WWF, and he wanted a unique product. But there was one guy who I guess he didn't have this conversation with, who promoted in Staten Island. His name was Tommy D. And so I didn't get canceled from that show, and I showed up. And I sort of had to prove myself to him that night. And Gary and I went out for something to eat afterwards. And when he saw my work and the connection that I had with the people in an area where I had announced forever, our relationship continued. so that's how I started working for the Crockett's. It was through Gary Chester.
Okay. I think for a lot of fans today, or fans that grew up during that period, they look back on the NWA in 1988, 1989, 1990 with a lot of fondness for that product. For the wrestlers that were there at that time, Flair, Sting, Steamboat, Terry Funk, the Great Muta, the Steiners. What was, and you spoke about your thoughts on the AWA product, or at least that one night with Vergania. What were your thoughts on the NWA product, or at least what they had at that point when you were working for them those early years?
When I started working for them, it was such a different product from what I was used to, because the wrestlers in the WWF, for the most part, would work light. And the wrestlers in the NWA were beating the hell out of each other. And I became a huge NWA fan as I'm working with them and I'm watching the interaction with the crowd, because it was more of a kick-ass style. And it was really well run. I think Dusty was probably the booker when I started with them. And I was treated well. I was paid really well, and I was, happy to be working with them. But it was like my initial reaction was, these guys aren't playing. This is like, I knew that it was wrestling. I knew everything, was predetermined, but they're really beating the shit out of each other. I had never seen anything like that before. And Baltimore is known as the northernmost southern city in the country, and it was like that southern style of take no prisoners wrestling.
What as you're ring announcing, and you go, and after you're done with the introductions, you sit ringside. Who were the performers, or who were the matches that you almost become a fan again? You're not there working; you're there as a fan in the crowd watching.
With which promotion?
I guess in this case specifically NWA.
Flair. You know what? Their roster from top to bottom was so strong. With the Rock and Roll Express and the Midnight Express and Magnum TA and Steamboat and Dusty and Barry Windham and Tully and Arn, and it would be hard to find a weak spot in their roster. Then if you were to go down the card and you had Paul Jones and Manny Fernandez and Al Perez and Eddie Gilbert, there wasn't a weakness there. The whole night I was psyched to be there.
Now, what was your range as a fan in general at this point? You're working for the NWA, working with Crockett. Were you still keeping tabs on the WWF, the dying days of the AWA and other independent promotions, or were you pretty much just locked in with where you were working at the time?
Well, as I said, I was working for the AWA and the NWA at the same time.
Right.
And in November of '88, I think it was, the Crockett sold to Turner. And I continued to, whenever Vern would call me, I would go out and do his shows, and whenever Gary Chester would call me, I'd do his shows. One day in, I think it was February of '89, Gary Chester and I were driving up to New Haven, where there was a house show for the NWA, and he says, it doesn't matter to me, but I have to tell you that Jim Herd's sending a message to you. So I said to him, well, if Jim Herd has something to say to me, why doesn't he call me? He said, well, no, he wants you to stop working for Vern Gagne, because it's confusing with our brand, and you're the face of both organizations. And he just said that can't continue. So I said to him, well, as long as I can't talk to him personally, you can tell Jim Herd that if he wants me to stop working when I'm not booked with you fellas, that he should start paying me not to work for the other guys. because I'm not going to give up paydays elsewhere and then just sit back and wait for him to decide when I'm going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when they hired me full-time. In September of 89, I started full-time with WCW, and I left teaching.
I'm a little, and I don't know if the word is surprised, but your ability to kind of speak up for yourself
Yes.
in this industry where, I guess to a degree that's frowned upon. Like you were going to give you crap and you're going to like it.
Well, the McMahons got away with that early on. Remember, I had those experiences back then, and I learned from those experiences. And I don't mean to sound like if all of them said, go to hell, that I would have been okay with it. I loved doing what I was doing. But, I don't know. It was wrong. I guess it's more of my personality of like things that are right and things that are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and you may want to, I know we've been talking for a long time, but the very last words that I had with anyone from those main organizations was that kind of a conversation, having to do with Eric Bischoff. But, it just, certain things are right and certain things are wrong. And by that point, I understood my value as an announcer. My value as an announcer was never my voice. Howard Finkel always had the best voice.
Mm-hmm.
My strength as an announcer was, other than from the business side of being dependable and all of that, was the connection that I had with the fans that I alluded to earlier, where when we would go to Baltimore, if Ricky Morton was stoned in the hotel room and he couldn't be there, and I had to get into the ring and tell people he wasn't going to be there, or if Flair had missed a flight and he wasn't going to be in Baltimore, my strength was talking to the people. It's just an example of what the kind of thing that I would have to do, and give them the bad news. And then it was always a challenge to me to get them, after I gave them the bad news, I would also have something else to tell them, that the replacement or whatever. But to get the people in the stands to believe that what they were now going to see, which they didn't pay their ticket when they bought their ticket, this isn't what they planned on, but what they now were going to see was going to even be greater than what they thought they were going to see when they were driving to the arena. And that's a very valuable asset to have in the eyes of a promoter. And then I would tell them, you have till the end of the first match to get your money back, for a refund. And then intermission, I would go up to Gary Jester and I would ask him how many refunds he had. And that's how I would gauge the success of what I was doing. Now, granted that the cards were stacked in my favor because people already had found their babysitter,
Mm-hmm.
They already had paid to park, they were there already. But nevertheless, from incident to incident, or the night when the Steiners promised that they were going to go next door, there was a big, this was in Philadelphia, there was a big telethon, and they promised that they were going to go next door, support the telethon, go on TV, and sign autographs to get the people from the arena to go next door from the Civic Center to promote the telethon they had. And they swore the whole night they would be there. And as soon as their match ended, they hopped in the car and they left. And I had to go over to tell the people that what I just told you an hour and a half ago, that's not going to happen. They're not going to be here. That I was very good at doing that kind of thing and connecting with the people.
And as a fan, I think one of the things you brought to the table is your enthusiasm more than even just connecting with the fans. That was my takeaway from watching you in WCW at that time in the early 90s, was that you were just always so different sounding than other ring announcers. And we all agree, Howard Finkel obviously does, have that iconic voice, but your enthusiasm and the way you were very unique in your enunciations was what always hooked me to you as an announcer.
Well, when I was working with WCW and Jim Ross was the play-by-play guy, he was instrumental in sending out the message to the folks at home that the ring announcer was part of the announce team. He elevated me in my position and what I did just by the way he talked about me. The world's most dangerous announcer.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go up to the ring, Gary Michael Cappetta. Wow, did you see Gary run away from that guy? From 1974 to 85, on WWF broadcasts, my name was never mentioned once. That's the difference.
Right.
And what I earned as far as the respect of the fans, I did on my own in the WWF. But I had a great deal of support from Jim Ross in later years.
Interesting. Where did obviously one of the most recognizable introductions you made in the ring was when you announced Sting. Where did you get the idea to do the very excellently enthusiastic introduction when Sting was in the ring or when Sting was about to do his match? Like, where did you? Because that's the one that most people always remember. This is Sting. Like, where did you get the idea? I got to give Sting this little extra something when I do when I announce him.
Yep, and that was totally planned. Sting is first off, I did have a very enthusiastic and just boom out there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a trained voice, so I always had to be careful not to lose it. And Sting, I'm also a language teacher. Okay, it's not easy to boom that sound.
Mm-hmm.
And since it was only one syllable, I needed to take a running leap to get to Sting. So I needed to put words before it to give me that run toward the Sting. So that's why I just decided to do This is Sting. Just because I couldn't have boomed Sting. I also didn't think it was very effective either. So it's more like, like the drum roll leading up to the cymbal clash.
And to me, it was effective because it became iconic. Because that was always my favorite, ring announcement of a wrestler, and I can't ever not hear Sting's theme music without hearing you echoing in the background, even if you're not over the clip at all. So
Cool.
It definitely worked. It definitely did.
Thank you.
You were talking earlier, Gary, about the ring announcer that you probably replaced. I'm trying to think if it's the same guy that they had like in Greensboro, and he was that older gentleman with the glasses, and he kind of had that, like, I think he announced like the first maybe 3 or 4 Starcades, and he was almost like the house guy for the Crockett's.
Yeah.
And
Graham probably knows his name. He's taller. Graham should know this.
Usually it's just them that give me this hard time. I should know his name. I should have it memorized, but I can look it up. We should probably mention that.
It might pop into my mind, but it's not right now.
But I bring it up because I think you were an excellent transition for the TV brand that they needed to have, particularly when they really got on TBS a lot for the bigger shows like the first Clash. Because remember, this was a time, obviously, the Crockett's were trying to compete with Vince. They did the first Clash the same night as WrestleMania 4, and then they had Bunkhouse Stampede with the Rumble and all this other jazz. And I think you were an excellent transition from that older-sounding kind of your dad's grandfather's wrestling to like the new kind of energetic product that they were trying to create. And I think I think you were an excellent transition for that.
You never know what feedback they're getting from whom. For instance, they may have taken the program, shown it to syndicators before he came on board, and they may have said, made some kind of comment that, this is really low key. We need something more exciting. Or maybe after I started, there was a comment made by a syndicator about, the excitement that was generated. And I don't know what led them to their conclusions, or that they just came upon those conclusions on their own, that this is, we like this better for our TV product. I'm not sure.
Being in the NWA / into WCW, what were some of the changes as an employee? What were some of the changes you saw going from the Crockett's to Ted Turner? Was there any real glaring? Because on the TV product, they really didn't. It was very gradual. They didn't really say WCW in the beginning. It was still kind of NWA, and they kind of quietly went into it. But as an employee, what were some of the changes you saw when the Crockett's sold to Ted and WCW really started to form?
Well, Gary Jester went. He had the same role with WCW, and he's who I dealt with. So from a business point, I mean, I worked out my own deal before I went, and then I didn't. Obvious. I would think the first time that I saw changes was when the product started to turn cartoonish, and I always thought, and obviously everyone thought that business-wise, that WCW made so many stupid mistakes that it was almost intentional. And in fact, they hired the arena booker from WWF, and he would do such foolish booking of arenas that you had to sit back and say, this has got to be intentional. I mean, there was a thought amongst the people that worked, at least out on the road, that he was continued to be a spy for Vinny, and that he was undermining the promotion, and was collecting a double paycheck. That's how amateurish and foolish some of the arena bookings was. For instance, knowing that Wednesday night is church night in Tennessee, and booking us there when everyone's in church, no one's going to come. Booking us in a huge 18,000 seat or so arena down in where's the Alamo? Is that San Antonio?
San Antonio.
Yeah.
One of the most Catholic cities in the country, and booking us on Easter Sunday.
Oh, jeez.
Things like that. It was foolish. It was just so. And like I said, people they were so glaring, these mistakes, that you had to start arguing they were intentional, and that the suits of Turner Broadcasting were clueless, and that they just were easy to convince into that this is the way things should be done.
It's amazing to me how many times over the years there's been someone in WCW that everyone later said they thought was planted by Vince McMahon. I don't know what that says about the track record, but there seems to be at least 3 or 4 of those instances over the course of WCW's existence.
Yeah, he was the assistant arena booker under Ed Cohen with WWE, and maybe he was just incompetent. Maybe he was just a coffee getter for Ed Cohen. I don't know. I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but that's what it seemed to be.
Well, guys, if I can step in, for one, it's Dr. Tom Miller, and I do apologize for anyone listening to this who I just lost all my street cred with for not knowing that off the top of my head. So, the late Dr. Tom Miller, sir, I do apologize. Your family is great. You did a fantastic job. With that said, Gary, you said that your credibility was key. That's what you brought, your enthusiasm, your credibility with the fans. Now, when the product starts becoming more cartoonish, and when you start having to announce guys like the Juicer, Art Bar, or Oz, Arachnaman, do you run the risk of hurting your own credibility by trying to put them over?
How could you forget the Ding Dongs?
And the Ding Dongs.
Multimania.
I just agreed with the people. I introduced those acts like I did everyone else, but when people would come up to me and talk to me about it, I would agree with them. It was I would never try to defend that part of the product. In fact, when I would, giving the example that I gave before about someone not showing that should have been there, when I told the people that Ric Flair is unable to be here tonight, and they started to boo I said nothing, and I let them get it all out. And with a shake of a head and a stern look, I acknowledged, you are right. This sucks. And once that ebb went down, then I started to boom what was coming instead. Mm-hmm. In other words, it's not to make people feel like they're stupid. I agree with you. That would have been great. I wish I could have seen that too. Or, yeah, the ding-dongs, that's really a dumb idea. And I think that's why, because I didn't toe the company line except with what I had to do, with what I was paid to do.
Right, and I think your reactions are a big part of your announcing, in addition to just delivering that sort of news, but even before matches or when someone came to the ring, you definitely tended to play more, I don't want to say as a character, but you definitely were more of part of the show than just a standard ring announcer. You got involved, and I thought that was good as well.
Yeah, I think the difference, the way I would put it, would be, and I don't want to name anyone individual, but that the difference between ex-announcer and me is that I had a personality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're right. Yeah.
Is that what makes a good ring announcer? I'm trying to find the distinguish between, like, when you watch someone as a ring announcer, how do you know if they're good or bad? What are they doing right? What are they doing wrong?
I don't think there's any one way to do it effectively. I just think you need to play on your strengths. Although the one thing that I do think would have been universal, and I think still should be, is when everything that the wrestlers are trying to communicate to the audience, I need to support. And everything that the promotion is trying to get over, I need to support. So, for instance, when I'm introducing two individuals, and before I finish my introduction, they start pounding each other, I'm not going to gently put the microphone down and step out of the ring. Mm-hmm. I know that I'm not going to get hurt, or at least not intentionally. I would throw the microphone and jump through the ropes in such a way so that my body would hit the railing. Because if the guy who's sitting in the front row is looking at me right next to these guys, if I'm not communicating there's danger, why should he think there's danger?
Right.
So that, I think, is a universal. But as far as your style, I mean, there were many announcers that I would see before I even knew I was going to be an announcer that I liked. But they were very different from me. And I think everybody takes pieces of performers that they liked, and take them. With me, there were three individuals, and the seriousness of one, the goofiness of another, goofiness meaning humanity of another, mm-hmm. And I put them together for me. And then I evolved and brought more of myself into it.
Well, when we're still speaking about WCW, that was an organization that certainly in the time you were there, but certainly during the entire run of the company, it seemed like they had a real problem with stability at the top. It seemed like, every couple of years someone else would come in, if not years and months, and take over the company and set new rules and do things their way. How did that affect you at all? And if so, how? To what degree?
No, it didn't affect me. But this is just my nature. In education, it would be the same way. Whoever the leader is, I'm a good team player. I will support them. I do try to be honest with them. When there were, like you had said earlier, that there were negative stories through the years about Vern Gagne, same had applied to Bill Watts. And I found Bill Watts very easy to work with. The key with Bill Watts was do what he tells you to do. It's just that simple. And I also found him to be somewhat flexible. The night that You want a story? I don't.
Of course.
I know it's
Absolutely.
We've been speaking a long time, and I don't want to.
Oh no, please share.
All right.
We're working on your time. You can hang up at any point, but we'll stick around as long as you want.
Yes.
No, I'm good. I just can't imagine people like their batteries are going to die in their computers, aren't they?
That's okay. They can just pause and come back to it.
Oh,
Exactly.
okay. All right.
Beauty of podcasts.
Unless unless this is they listen to this over a couple of weeks, but nevertheless, the night that Ron Simmons won the title in Baltimore.
And not to interrupt you, but I think that crowd reaction is off the charts and one of the best crowd reactions I've ever seen on television.
I just watched that match recently, like last week. I watched it. It was incredible. You're right, Graham. It was incredible pop. Yeah, absolutely.
With the guy crying at the end.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm just trying to think of the setup. There was wasn't there there was a like sort of a drawing.
Yes.
Right. In order
yes,
to
that was the night that Jake attacked Sting. It was supposed to be Sting's title match, and they had to determine the new challenger.
And Jake Roberts had attacked Sting, right?
Graham's just trying to prove himself after failing epically earlier.
Yeah.
He took him out. So we needed a challenger for
Vader.
For Vader. Okay. So in the back before the show. Bill Watts had those that were involved huddled around him, and he was laying out how this was going to be. And he had just taken over WCW, if I remember correctly. The first thing that would have never happened with Vinny is that we would have never picked names out of a crumpled paper bag.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it would have been
velvet or something.
Right, or a big tumbler or something.
Yeah, with lights and smoke and all that. But nevertheless.
Getting your butt pinched by Lord Alfred. Yeah, exactly.
And he actually did have a bag with everybody's name in it, who was supposed to, like all the different names. And, but before that, we had to tell the people that, once again, they were not going to see the Sting-Vader confrontation. And the way he had laid it out was that as the president or whatever his title was of WCW, he was going to tell everybody that they weren't going to see what they thought they were going to see. So I let him finish, and we went through how we're going to do the raffle and whatever. And I let him finish, and I said, Bill, I said, that sounds great. But I just have one thought, like maybe a tweak. I said, you're just taking over. You are the figurehead. Do you really want to start your tenure with being on television and people booing you? Because they're going to boo when you tell them that they're not going to see Sting go against Vader. He said, well, what else could we do? I said, let me do it. I'll tell them that that's not going to happen. I know how to do it. And if they continue to boo me, so what? It's me. I'm the ring announcer. Who cares? And he was very open. I mean, obviously I was saving him, but he was very open to that. So, it's just a matter of whoever is in charge, just knowing how to work with them. And I can read people pretty well. And I think that's the key. That's it. There was no big ending of that story.
Okay.
although I will tell you that he says to me, part of the plan was, now remember, Gary, whatever name you pick out, you have to say that it's Ron Simmons. So I said, Bill, I understand that. I get it.
So wait, why did they even have other names written on there?
Well, there was a reason for that.
Okay.
If the bag ever got away from us,
yep,
then all of the different names would be on there.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
And with that in mind, he ended in the back by saying to me, and after you pick the name, and after you make that announcement, you be sure. You guys want to guess what he wanted to protect things? What would he want?
Give the bag out?
Put that slip of paper back in the bag.
Oh,
Because
right.
he didn't want a chance
There you go.
that I would drop it. And it'd say Tommy Rich or whoever.
Well, that begs the question: who really got the title match that night?
Yes.
You know what? I don't remember that.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
It was one of the ding-dongs.
But if you watch the tape of after I announced that it was Simmons, and you just look at Bill Watts, you will see him put his hand out, maybe his finger extended, and point down. In other words, put it back in the bag.
Oh.
I wonder what the odds would have been for it to actually have come out Ron Simmons. That would have been quite the pull.
Yeah.
You know, I remember so many details about that. Like, why can't I remember whose name it was? But
What odds are higher, the hot dog being stuck in your glasses or you pulling Ron Simmons' name actually out of the bag?
I think the hot dog.
you know what? And the chance is that maybe I never even read it because I didn't want to make the mistake of saying the wrong name. It's possible that I never knew. But honestly, I don't know.
It's an eternal mystery.
Well, how would you compare Bill to Eric Bischoff?
Well, they had different goals. Bill's goal was realism, and Eric's goal was being Vince McMahon. So there was just night and day.
You know, there are always stories about that time period where Tony Schiavone thought maybe he was going to get the job, and a few other guys, and that Bischoff kind of came out of left field for that job. Being a full-time employee at that time, were you privy to any of that information, or even if you weren't, was there a leader in the clubhouse, so to say, that everyone thought was going to get that job?
You know, I stayed as far away as I could from office politics, and it's one of the reasons that I attribute my 35 years in wrestling. Because I had nothing to do with any of it. I wasn't in the office unless I had to be. I loved being on the road. I loved announcing, and I really didn't care what they did in the back. You know, back there. I had an opportunity to work in the office, and I turned it down.
Interesting.
Doing what?
I didn't know either.
Oh, okay.
It was toward the end of my tenure with them, and I was also doing a Spanish language version of WCW for KCAL in Los Angeles, and they were flying me back and forth. It was very expensive. I had just bought my house here in New Jersey, and you know, they had said, you know, we'd love for you to continue with us, but you'd have to move to Atlanta and work in the office when you're not announcing on the road. And I declined.
Well, walk us through eventually how you know, during this time in WCW, Eric Bischoff takes over. You start to see Michael Buffer show up, and because I guess he's trying to make the main events look bigger than they are. Even though you've been around, you've got the credibility, you've been on TV for all this time. How do you eventually just say bye WCW?
Well, it came down to what I had just laid out, which was they wanted me to continue but work in the office.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to do that. So, in other words, if I had, in order to work for them, I would have had to have established residence in Atlanta.
Okay.
And that wasn't something I was willing to do.
As part of that, can you share the story about, I thought this was really interesting, share the story about working Slamboree 95, which was your last show, but it sounds like Bischoff didn't even expect you to show up.
Yeah, that suspicion that he had, that I was just going to not show up for my last show, was built on a couple different things. Number one, his disdain for, back then at least, his disdain for people in wrestling and that they're not professional. And also, the last WCW Saturday night that I did at Center Stage in Atlanta, once again, it goes back. I mean, I knew I was leaving the organization. My contract wasn't going to be renewed because I wasn't moving. And so I knew that it was going to be the last time I was at Center Stage. And not knowing what I might do in the future as far as announcing or broadcasting goes, I wanted to maintain my credibility with the people. I always have. And so I told the people from the center of the ring that this was going to be my last night with them in Atlanta. And that caused a great deal of concern amongst the suits. They actually came out and were standing at the top of the aisles to see what I was going to say next. I don't know why they just didn't pull the plug, because that would have been the easiest thing to. But I told them, David Penzer was going to continue, and I want you to support David as much as you've supported me. Because when we did those shows, we would go to the air. I would have to wind the people up during a commercial, and I couldn't have been effective if the people didn't respond to me. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciated that, because we had the same people there every time we did it, and they knew what I was up to and what I was doing, and they were there for me. So we were like a team, me and the audience. And then I finished by saying, be sure that you continue to support the best wrestling on the planet, WCW. And I said, then I would say to them, and this is the last match I'm going to announce here at Center Stage, so I really want to see this building rock. And so there was nothing negative about the promotion that I had said. Mm-hmm. But I think they interpreted that as, this is my swan song, this is my last WCW show. But I was talking to the people that were in the audience that would come every time we were there. I wasn't signing off from my position because my contract was still in force. So for the first time in the years that I worked with WCW, instead of picking the flight I was going to take, the office did, and they put me on a rinky-dink flight that was late getting to Tampa. So I was late for the production meeting, and when I didn't show up for the production meeting, I guess their assumptions were happily resolved in that, yeah, he's not professional. He's just not going to show. And, I walked into the meeting, and they stopped, and they just looked. It was just silence. And I came to find out that was due to a little bit of embarrassment, because they had scratched me off of the formats, and they put David Penzer's name instead, which is a way of saying, we just thought you were another scrub, and you weren't going to, be here. So the room was packed, and it had this big table, this big long boardroom table. It was all filled. So with a couple of other people, I sat on the floor against the wall. And when Gary Jester came over to hand me the format sheet, he said, just ignore what we wrote in. You can just do what you usually do. And so that night I went out. I did what I usually do. But that night was a little different in that Buffer was supposed to announce the last two matches. I don't remember what they were. It must have been a double main event or something.
Hogan and Vader, I think.
And it was not to interrupt.
Was involved with one, wasn't he? Sting?
It was Hogan and Savage against Vader and Flair was the main, and then the match before was Sting and Bubba.
There you go. And little did I know that when Buffer got to the arena, he told them that it was below him to announce the two matches, that he was only being hired, he was only getting paid as $6,000 a night to announce the main event. So when we got to where Buffer was supposed to come out and pick up, no one ever showed up. And I didn't know I was supposed to introduce that match until the music played. So I pretty much had it, at that point, because at least they could have told me.
Right.
Right.
I mean, even at the last minute, they could have told me in my earpiece. So when I finished, I left the arena. I went back to the hotel. I got a call. Gary, why don't you come? You need to come down to the bar. The guys want to say goodbye, whatever. And I said, no, you know what? I really don't feel like it. It's like, no, we want you to come out. So I went down, and Bischoff was a little drunk, was there, And I had really had it with him. It's like he had lied to me so many times that I really had no time for him. But he came over and he starts talking and slurring, but he was saying, really want to thank you, on behalf of the company. You've been, such a good employee, and I want you to know that this may not be the end. That someday I may be calling you. I may want you to come back. And I said to him, Eric, I don't want to come back. And he said, no. He said, no, really, I want. I said, Eric, didn't you hear me? I said, never, ever in the future will I ever work for you again. And then we were interrupted. But it was like, I don't know. I don't even know. He was so soused he may not, even remember that. And then 2 weeks later, I got a call from Gary Jester. Michael Buffer couldn't make the next pay-per-view, which was in June, and it was in Dayton, Ohio. And through this process, I had advocated for David Penzer. I helped him to establish himself with them. I mean, he had worked with them as he would bring up preliminary wrestlers from Florida back then. But I helped him work out his deal. I didn't want him to get screwed. So we did our best with that. So nevertheless, David was going to continue doing what I was going to do. And I got a call from Gary Jester, and he said, Michael Buffer can't make Dayton, and we would like for you to come out. Are you available? So I said, well, yeah. I said, I'm available, but what are you going to pay me? And he said, well, we're going to pay you what we usually pay you. So I said, but I thought you said that you wanted me to come in for Michael Buffer. And he said, yeah. I said, well, Michael Buffer makes $6,000. I think that's what I should be making too. Oh, no, I don't think we can do that. So I said to him, well, then find someone else. So we hung up, and he calls me back. And he says, I talked to Eric about this, and he's agreed to pay $2,500 to come out and do that. I said to him, Gary, I said, would Buffer come out for $2,500? I said, I'll tell you what, I'll make it even a better deal for you. You pay me the $6,000 that you would pay Buffer, and instead of just doing the main event, I'll do the whole show. Which is what he intended for me to do anyway.
Right.
So he said, I don't think Eric's going to go for this. I said, well, that's how I feel. We hang up. He calls me back. Eric is willing to pay you $3,000 to come out and announce in
get better and better.
So I said to him, Gary, I said, I'm not in a negotiating mode. I said, I'm not under contract with you guys, and I have no reason to play ball. And it just seems fair to me that he's got budgeted $6,000 for an announcer. I said, and by the way, you know how crappy this is for David Penzer? Do you know how little trust they're putting in David? I said, David is very competent. He would do a great job. And we're just talking about one match that Buffer would be coming in to do, and you're reaching out to me to begin with? I said, what message is that sending to your new announcer? I said, you guys are like beneath contempt. Tell them it's $6,000 or nothing. And I never heard from them again. And every once in a while, I think, what can I spend $6,000 on? But I did think that was really a below the belt shot at David Penzer. And we're talking about announcing one match.
Right.
We're talking about announcing. We're not talking about brain science, science and doing an operation. It's incredible. We're just talking about speaking. It's so dumb.
I made a huge mistake in asking you about your departure before, and I think the fans of my website and I think the fans of the Place to Be would really call us out if we did not bring up the scissors incident in England between Arn and Sid. I think that's an incident that, had it happened today, it would be instant worldwide news. I remember as a child, I was, 12 years old. I heard about it months and months later when, whatever Bill Apter put in his magazine about it. I don't remember seeing anything on the news about it. Certainly not CNN or anything that would have a big presence here in America. But being there and seeing and being witness to every bit of it, can you walk us through that?
Sure. And that, by the way, that it was front page news in England, which was interesting. That it didn't catch on.
Nowadays, it would have been all over TMZ.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were the promoter who bought the shows to bring us on tour in the UK was accustomed to rock stars, and we were treated incredibly well. Even having a follow-up vehicle that was the caterer that would cook for us every night in the arena. And they would, at the end of the night, stock the bus with sandwiches and beer and soda, whatever, water. So we would travel through the night to the next town, and so everybody got on the bus. And the point of that lead-in is that everybody, well, not everybody, but the guys that were involved in that got pretty drunk. So by the time we got to the hotel, which normally would be closed, as far as their bar goes, stayed open because they knew these American wrestlers were coming in, and they could make a bunch more money. So when we got to the hotel, which was, I don't know, like 2-3 in the morning, many of the fellas went to the bar and continued drinking. And I went up to my room, which happened to be directly across from Arn Anderson's room. And so I go to bed, and I fall asleep, and I'm woken up by what I thought was like a tremor, like of an earthquake. And I put the light on in the room, and I see the pictures on the wall, like bouncing off the wall. And I go over and so something is happening in the hallway. As I woke up, the cobwebs clear, thinking where I am, and my first reaction was, oh man, the guys are playing around. Like, can't they just go to sleep? I want to sleep. And I looked through the little hole in the door, and I'm just seeing bodies go back and forth. And I reached down to open the door to tell these guys to go to bed, and I hear a bunch of expletives, and from what I'm hearing now, and the pounding keeps on happening, I'm realizing this is real. There's something happening here. And luckily I didn't open the door, because I don't know what would have happened. And I just waited until the rumbling stopped, and when I went into the hallway afterwards, Arn was lacerated over his entire torso, and Doug Dellinger was the head of security at the time. He was on tour with us. He was there, and then a bunch of the boys were there. And I don't know, there's not much more to the story other than what had happened was, as you guys probably know, Arn and Sid had gotten into a verbal confrontation down in the bar. I think it had to do with Flair, as far as the value of Flair to the organization. Doug Dellinger was there. He sent both guys to their room. Arn went to his room. Sid, his room was on the other side of the hotel, went to his room. I think he grabbed a chair and backed back around and pounded on Arn's door. Arn grabbed scissors from his shaving kit, and they went at it. And then they were both sent home, and there was never beer on the bus again.
Wow.
Rightly so.
Yeah, so there's nothing inside there. That's what I experienced.
Well, I just thought that was such a, I don't know. I think it probably deserved to be a bigger story at the time than what it was, in terms of the domestic or even international media. But that's just me.
Yeah, and within the roster, the sentiment was always on Arn's side, only because of the personalities involved. Because everybody liked Arn and Sid not so much.
So we're finished with WCW.
Actually, I had one more WCW.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Quick
Go
question. Jesse Ventura. Kopechki. Any inside joke there, or is he just being typical Jesse?
No, he was he was just being Jesse.
Okay.
And any way he wanted to make fun of me was welcomed,
Right, it brought extra attention, I'm sure. So
That's right, exactly.
that always just stuck out with me.
Was it JR who called you the world's most dangerous announcer?
Or Cornette.
Or was it Cornette?
Cornette created it, and then JR carried it on.
That's right.
It came from Letterman, right? It was
right, the world's most dangerous
it was
band
Bruce,
or something.
The Bruiser was the Bruiser the world's most dangerous wrestler? Way back when Letterman was a kid, he used to watch wrestling. It was either the Crusher or the Bruiser. I don't remember. And that's where he got that little expression, the world's most dangerous. And then he applied it to the band or the band leader on his show?
Yeah, the band, I think. Yeah.
Paul Schaefer or whatever. And that's where Cornette took it from and called me the world's most dangerous announcer, which I guess was funny because of how, meek, serious I come across as being an announcer.
So we're good with WCW now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had to ask.
I didn't want to step on toes.
No, it's okay.
Okay. Well, how do you go, and this is 1995, how do you go from WCW to skip ahead a few years and you start showing up in this kind of indie, newbie company? It's getting a lot of talk. A lot of really talented wrestlers start showing up there called Ring of Honor.
Well, in the second edition of Body Slams, I wrote extra chapters for that second edition, addressing the state of wrestling at that time and my dismay with the loss of what I call the art of the game, and how the art of the game was being destroyed. And I had heard about Ring of Honor, which was based in Philadelphia, not too far from where I live. So I decided one night just to go out and see what that was about. And I bought tickets, went out, sat in the third row ringside, and I was greatly pleased and heartened by what I saw, which was their attempt to return to practice the art of the game, of wrestling, how I think wrestling is the most effective and how it should be. And one of the commissioners, there was still a commissioned then, noticed me and introduced me, and that was nice. So after I saw what I saw there, I called Gabe up, who was the booker, I guess the owner or booker of Ring of Honor, and I told him how impressed I was with what I saw. And I said to him, if there's anything that I can do to help you to continue the success of your promotion, I would be more than willing to do. And I don't mean just in front of the camera. I'll do anything that could help. And he thanked me, and I heard from him a few weeks later, and he had I guess he had been thinking about it, and, I said to him, the only thing I won't do is be a ring announcer.
Ooh.
I don't want to ring announce. That is, you have a really good ring announcer there. It really doesn't, even if you didn't, it wouldn't matter. I'm sort of want to step back from that role. but anything I can contribute beyond that, I'll be happy to do. And he came up with a backstage interviewer idea, which is what I did with them for a few years. And I really enjoyed working with the younger talent and helping people to establish their interview skills, and gave me an opportunity to meet a whole new generation of wrestlers that I have a great deal of respect for.
So that was interesting when you said help them with their interview skills. Would you guys kind of go over it before it was shot and say, well, here's what I've got planned. How would you suggest I improve it?
No, it was more of we would understanding that it wasn't on broadcast television, right? It was on DVDs,
mm-hmm.
and we would do whatever, we would do the interview, and there would be times when I would afterwards would say to the wrestler, why don't you think about this, or why don't you consider that, or the people that are sitting out there after they've seen what you've done in the ring, they have a certain idea of you, and maybe that wouldn't be so appropriate to say, considering how they view you, that kind of thing. It wasn't like, because I wasn't being brought in to teach, overtly teach,
mm-hmm.
or train anyone, so I wouldn't want, and I didn't know the history of a lot of these guys either, so I wouldn't want to talk down to them or make certain assumptions. I would just gently tell them, give them some feedback more than anything.
Okay. From that time period, I think Ring of Honor right now probably has been getting arguably more attention than it's ever had, simply because CM Punk and Daniel Bryan, Bryan Danielson are leading the WWE, and both of them had their big breaks in Ring of Honor. From the time in which you worked there, who really stood out for you, and have you stayed fans of those guys that you met and that you kind of tried to help out during those years?
I think Bryan Danielson made the biggest impact on me. Number one, because of his incredible wrestling talent. And honestly, I don't follow today's product, so I don't know if what he does in the WWE resembles what he did in Ring of Honor. Does it? Or
I think in-ring wise, the focus is more in Ring of Honor, and in WWE it's more character based, and sometimes you do get the chances to really show off what you can do. But I think historically, as it is now, it's more rare than common.
Mm-hmm. He was very impressive, both in the ring and as an individual. And at the time, I think, is he not from he's from the state of Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, he was trying to, because I would always encourage everyone to try to get a college degree, that when your wrestling career is over, your life is probably only half over. So you need to prepare for that second half now, when it's probably more doable for you. And so we would have those kind of conversations. And I'll just give you a really quick anecdote. Was also very friendly with John Walters, and so John would stay at my place when he came down from Massachusetts and wrestle in this area. And one particular night, Brian didn't have any place set to stay, so I just said, "Well, why don't you just come over to the house and we'll stay with me?" So he came over, and I brought out some old NWA video, and I have a giant screen TV, and he popped in an NWA show, and he sat on the floor directly, like, underneath this big screen. And I forget, I had something, I asked him a question, and he just looked at me and he said, please, like never. And I think he said it half in jest, but he said, please. He said, never interrupt an Arn Anderson match. he was like, he was studying Arn Anderson, and what Arn was doing on this old NWA tape. It was just great. I just, CM Punk was also very talented, and especially with controlling a crowd, also very aware politically. So it didn't surprise me that he was able to negotiate himself to where he is.
That's an interesting use of words.
What's that?
Very aware politically. Absolutely. So he's able to get to where he is today.
Mm-hmm. And that does not in any way demean his talent.
Mm-hmm.
But talent, and it's not just wrestling, it's any form of entertainment, actor, singer, whatever. The most talented aren't necessarily anyone that you would know. And if it's not somebody that's pushing for you, or if you're not just aware of how the politics of whatever that industry is, of how that works, the chance that anyone would know your name is pretty slim.
Can you, just because you brought that up, and I think it's very interesting, can you remember any instances of where, I guess, Punk was showing off his knowledge of knowing how to work politically?
No, and that's why he's so good.
Oh, okay.
That's what makes him so good. Whatever he may have, however he may have maneuvered himself, would have been so under the radar that you would only recognize it when the result that he wanted happened.
Gotcha.
It probably was on the phone, the week leading up to the show. I mean, I don't know. Talking to the booker or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and once again, I don't want that to come across as being a negative.
No, and I don't think it does. I think that word does get a negative connotation. But at the same time, I think that I agree with you. I think that is how you help advance your career.
Yeah, I mean, or at least get to a position where you're seen, give you an opportunity to succeed. Yeah, I mean, I never saw anything, and once again, I think that speaks to how well he is at doing it.
So what I guess brought about your end in Ring of Honor?
Gabe just wanted to go in another direction, and called me up one day. And by the way, and they were wonderful to me. They just to give you an example of how great they were to me, they took my book and they sold it at the arenas. They put it on their website, and they never took a penny from the proceeds of the book.
Wow.
And even when they shipped the book out, they incurred an expense that they just paid me full price for. In fact, they paid me a penny more for each book.
Wow.
They would pay me $20 a book, and it was $19.95. So 5 cents. So it was like amazing. I loved working with them.
And do you still follow their product?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Is it on the air in the New York or it's not nationally, right? New York, Philly. You guys
could answer whether how it's marketed in New England. I'm down here in the Carolinas. It's on Sinclair, which is in I think most of the national markets, but not all. The only way I'm able to watch, since it's not shown in my area, is I have to watch it on their website.
And is it pretty much the same kind of product?
I think with Jim Cornette booking it, I have just recently started following them on a weekly basis. But from what I've heard, I think Cornette has maybe slowed down the booking a little bit. So it's got a little bit more of an old school feel. It has slow build-ups, which I think is nice. And I don't know, can you guys add more to that?
Yeah, we just started getting on the CW here like a month and a half ago. And I try and watch most weeks. I DVR it because it airs like Saturday night at 10 p.m. here. So, yeah, it definitely has an old school feel to it. It's like three matches total each week, usually with one big main event. And, they build to the big local shows or the pay-per-views. And, a lot of airtime goes to Eddie Edwards, Davey Richards, obviously. Kevin Steen's been getting a lot of airtime. So, they focus heavily on certain guys. And I can't say I watched heavily earlier in the decade. I was certainly aware of what was going on. So I can't really compare it to that time period. Gary, I did want to ask you, though, I know obviously you're not following too much current stuff. Have you followed any of John's work as R.J. Brewer, the immigrant-hating heel?
Yeah, somewhat. I had gone out for the first taping of
Lucha Libre?
That Mexican, that Lucha group out in California in the role of a commentator. And it wasn't the direction that they wanted to go in. So I haven't been out to see any anymore, but just through John, he tells me what's going on and the havoc that he's causing.
That's for sure.
Yeah, he's been doing a hell of a job. This is definitely, he's come a long way from our days back at Assumption when he wasn't the best promo man, but now I think his mic work is phenomenal, and I'm hoping he gets some notice because I know he wants to try for one big run before he calls it a day. So I'm hoping this character, gets him noticed.
Well, it's up to the promotion. If they honestly don't understand the business model of that promotion, but I don't know. I hope things work out for them. I wasn't a huge fan of how they presented their product on television. It was way too much commercial content. But I think that may be an MTV2 problem, not their problem.
Right, I think so for sure. And it seems like they're up in the air actually right now with MTV, and they're running mostly as a touring company at the moment. So
here's the problem, though. For any potential competitor, if there ever could be a competitor to McMahon, and that is you cannot go on a network and present a product as you envision it the way McMahon does because he has so much power. Mm-hmm. You have to cave to certain preconceived ideas that the broadcast companies have. So you don't have full control. Bit different with Ring of Honor and Sinclair because the guy that made that deal loved the old NWA product in Baltimore, which was one of our strongest cities. So what he perceives to be successful wrestling and the art of the game is not far apart. But if you get an MTV executive who is not schooled in what has been successful with and how to present wrestling successfully, then you're going to be a victim of the mistaken thoughts that he has over and over again, and you just don't have the power to present a product purely the way you want it to be. And I don't see anyone else being successful for that reason. Unless Oprah wanted to start a wrestling promotion.
Well, her network failed, so I don't know how well she'd run a wrestling promotion either.
Maybe she needs wrestling on her own.
It worked for Ted Turner. All right, I think going through a career and everything, we've come to a good point to transition over to some of our listener questions. We have like 9 or 10 of these. I definitely wanted to try and get them all in before we wrap up. So I'm going to skip the first one, but I did want to mention Steve Wheely. He asked about you leaving Ring of Honor, what led to that. So we already went over that, so we can pass over his. Our buddy J. Arsenio D'Amato asks, how did you get along with Howard Finkel? Did he look at you as competition for his spot? Now, we did talk a lot about the Fink earlier, but we didn't really touch on that part of it.
Well, an interesting thing with ring announcers is that there's only one at any program. Mm-hmm. So you don't usually, your paths don't usually cross. Wrestlers or different rosters are combined, and referees may switch from one team to the other. But an announcer, you don't fraternize with other announcers. That being said, a couple of times that I have met him, he was very cordial. But we weren't we didn't hang out because there was no reason for there to be two announcers at a show.
Okay.
Sorry, that kind of like just like boom. That just like.
They were hoping you and Fink were going to have like a tuxedo match or something, but
No, see, I didn't because I want to picture Fink being a cool guy. So I'm glad that you guys get along.
Yeah, no, I
there's no heat there.
I concur with that. Our resident artisto of the Place to Be podcast, Jason Greenhouse, asks, did you think that Super Clash 3 would be the disaster that it was? Of course, that was the pay-per-view. I think it was probably AWA's last real big-time pay-per-view in 1989, I guess, or late 88. Did you? Would that
Von
be?
Erich? Kerry
Yeah,
Von
yep.
Erich
And your thoughts on that evening's main event between Kerry Von Erich and the King? That, of course, was when they were doing that whole combining the world class heavyweight title and the AWA. That's when they were doing. That's when Vern was trying to pull all these other promotions. And what were your thoughts on that show that night?
I have no thoughts of what happened in the ring, but I have thoughts about what happened in the locker room.
I can imagine.
Oh man. Kerry Von Erich. Kerry Von Erich brought his little daughter with him that night. I don't know, 8, 9 years old. And I guess it just depends on how, like, the culture in which you're brought up. And I guess if you were brought up in a wrestling family I was just really uncomfortable with his daughter being in the locker room with all the guys in all different states of undress. So that, I was like, that was kind of weird to me. And Kerry was looped. I don't know what he was out of. He wasn't lucid. He wasn't clear-minded. And so he sits across from me in a folding chair, and he's getting changed, and he puts his boots on, and he laces up his boots, and he stands up, and he falls flat in his face.
Wow.
And what he had done was he laced the chair into the laces.
Oh my gosh.
Holy cow.
And that was the night that he cut himself back in the locker room.
Yeah.
Underneath like his armpit.
Yeah, he had a scratch, and he forgot that he had a piece of blade in his tape, and he scratched his arm, and he cut his arm open.
And that's why, because he just wasn't.
Oh my God.
In a clear mind. Honestly, I don't remember so much of the show, but that part of the whole thing I do remember.
I think that sums that whole show up for everyone, to be honest.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, our next question comes from our buddy Savario DeFazio. He just asked simply, do you miss WCW? And judging by your comments earlier, I'm guessing probably very little of it do you miss.
Do I miss it?
Yes.
Throughout the 35 years, I was back and forth, teaching, writing, announcing, back and forth. And I would always be asked the question when I was announcing, do you miss teaching? And while I was teaching, do you miss announcing? And the answer is always no. And the reason is just because I'm just fortunate to enjoy two very different professions, and I just focus on what I'm doing at the time. And I love them both equally. So I don't miss it, but I'm not focused there, and I don't look back and have regrets.
Okay. All right, another resident Southerner with our man Graham, Ashley Cruz, asks, what's the one match event / event that you didn't work that you wish you could have?
There are none. No. Don't have any, like I said, I have no regrets about anything.
Okay. Ryan Schmock asks, what are your favorite moments from WWF and NWA/WCW? Do you own any of the matches from TV tapings you ring announced? And if WWE called you today and asked you to be in the Hall of Fame, would you accept?
Oh, wow. I do own some video. And there was a time when, it was a transition when I knew I was going to be ending my tenure with WCW, and I wanted to put together a promo reel, and I had hired some of the guys in the studio to put together a reel of some of my work. So I have that, and I have events. They're not on DVD, they're on the old VHS tape thingies. I do have I would probably have all of the ESPN shows, and I would have people tape things for me so I can keep track of what I was doing. I have like copies of. I did the voice. I did a ring announce voice in The Wrestler, the movie.
Right.
And so like the little things that I did along the way. There's a video game that I was a character in. And I've never seen it. I mean, I don't have any way to play it, but I have a box of it. It was never opened. Just different things, just not to forget. Hall of Fame. I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I was at a wrestling convention once, and this was years ago, and someone from WWE came up to me and told me that they were putting together a sort of like a Legends book, which since then has come out and I've seen. And he asked me if I would consult with him because I would know more about the figures that were important back in the 70s. And I asked him one question, and the answer to the question sealed my decision. I said, is Bruno Sammartino going to be featured in the book? Is he even going to be in the book? And he said, I don't know. So I said, I want nothing to do with it then. Like, how could that, how could that even be a question?
Right.
You know, like the cornerstone of what brought that organization through a couple of decades. Like, why would you even think about discounting that individual? So I don't know. I guess it depends on how it was proposed to me. But I really don't think I'm ever going to have to answer that question. I don't think it ever would happen. I don't think it would even dawn on them to ask me.
I hope they do, though, because you definitely deserve a spot in the announcer wing. So you're right over there, Graham.
Yes,
okay?
I'm sorry. I'm not
Right?
dying. I'm okay. Yep.
Okay, good. All right. Incidentally,
Now maybe if it was Graham's website Hall of Fame, I would have a whole different feeling about it.
Well, you're going in first.
Very good. The inaugural class.
We've got that on tape.
Mike Wilkinson, who we call him Wilkie, just as big a Triple H fan as me, asks, did any wrestlers ever ask you to announce them a certain way? Also, what was your favorite name to announce? We obviously talked about Sting a little while ago. His favorite was how you announced, obviously, Sting and Ric Flair. But what were some of your favorite guys to announce?
No one ever actually asked me to announce anything in any particular way. There was one time when, do you remember the Iron Sheik coming into WCW?
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And the first time that I introduced him for WCW Saturday Night on TBS, he got really upset with me because I didn't say that he was a former WWF champion. and he got really upset with me in the ring at that moment. Let me know, gave me a piece of his mind. I guess I guess the ones that everybody would, Lex Luger and Sting and Flair. I liked that. Do you remember when Norman the Lunatic became Trucker? Was it Trucker Norm?
Oh God.
Yes. Unfortunately, we do, yes.
We were in the production meeting. We were going to be introducing the character of the truck driver, and so I said, Dusty, who was conducting the meeting, I said, okay, now this guy, like, what does he weigh? He said, where is he from? Like, so I can introduce him the way you... He said, I don't really care where he's from. Just anything you want. And I made up.
Anything you want, baby.
What did I? Anyone remember where he was from? And it wasn't the name of a city or a town.
The truck stop?
It's from the highways and byways of America. So I sort of like that.
Yeah, well stated.
Yeah.
I gave Missy Hyatt her name of the First Lady of Professional Wrestling. Just made that up. So
Interesting.
It's little things like that stuck, you know?
Yeah. You know, there's a question coming up. Well, actually, you know what? Just ask the next question, and then I have an addendum to.
Well, I was actually just going to reference Dave Hall, but kind of skip the question because we already talked about it. Just if he had witnessed any major backstage events, and were you ever asked to be involved in other areas of the business? I think we touched on both of those. So go ahead, Scott. Why don't you just add?
Okay. One you talked about Graham, the infamous Sid Arn Scissors incident. I want to talk about an incident that's a lot lighter than that happened actually in that year, in 1993. Were you in the building, Gary, during the infamous Shockmaster debut?
Oh, that's not what I thought you were going to say. Yes, I was. I was in the ring, and they were on a stage,
right
across. Yeah.
And did you die laughing?
Yeah, throwing a flare for the gold.
No, I was terrified. I
think a lot of people were.
At the moment, I did not think that was funny. No.
Going back and watching Jesse just busting up on camera while they're doing it was, I think, the highlight.
Oh my God.
What did you think he was going to ask about?
I thought you were going to ask about the night that Mick Foley lost his ear.
Oh, well, let's hear about that one.
Oh yeah, Germany, yeah.
What most people don't realize about that was that Mick's ear wasn't fully attached to his head before it happened, because he had been doing that move where he would get slung into the ropes and insert his head between the middle and the top rope and then spin himself over. Yep. And then every night he would, when he would release himself from that, his ears would get nicked, like little by little by little. And one of the provisions that I had in my contract with WCW was they had a rule that said that they would pay for the rental car if there were 3 individuals in a car. And I knew from the beginning that would drive me crazy. So one of my perks was I traveled alone and they paid for it. And then along the way, if I wanted someone to drive with me, I would ask, and usually there would be no resistance because they paid for my hotel, they paid for my rental car, and whoever the wrestler was would get those bennies for the night. So every once in a while, Mick Foley would travel with me. And one night we were in Florida, and we stopped to see my mom, and he asked her to clean his ears out. And what he meant was that he had like crusts of blood and pus that would accumulate like in his ear and outside of his ear. So his ear had been pretty damaged before we got there. So we get to Germany, and the guys that set up the ring are German, and they've never set a ring up before. They don't know what they're doing. And our referee, I think was Nick Patrick, had to go home. So we had a referee that they imported from France who didn't speak any English. So we had a referee who didn't speak any English. We had a ring crew that didn't know how to set the ring up. And the first match went to the ring, and the ropes were really loose. So I guess Flair was in charge, and he told them, you need to go out and you need to tighten those ropes up. And they really tightened them up. Mm-hmm. So by the time Vader and Mick, by the time it was their match, they didn't know how tight the ropes were. So they did what they always did, and the head goes in between the ropes, spins himself over the top. And the referee didn't know that he was supposed to assist Mick in pulling the ropes apart to get him through. So the combination of having no help from a referee and the ropes being so tight that when Foley went through, his ear stayed up on the ring.
Oof.
Now, that was on the other side of the ring from where I was sitting, and I didn't see anything unusual. You know, there were some strands of hair I saw on the rope, but that wasn't unusual. But what's unusual was the reaction of the referee, who shrieked, started running. His legs were moving like he was running, but he wasn't going anywhere. And he started screaming out, "Ambulance, ambulance." And I don't understand French, but I understood what that meant.
Right.
And he bent down and took his thumb and his forefinger and gently, they were like tweezers, picked up something, and I didn't know what it was. And he's screaming at me, and he tossed it across the ring. And I'm looking at, like, I had no idea what it was. And it hits the ring and slides in front of me. And I looked down, and it looked like a piece of uncooked chicken fillet with tape and hair attached to it.
Mm.
And I realized that it was Mick's ear. And I knew that in order for there to be any possibility of his ear being reattached to his head, that to save the ear would have to go on ice. So I picked it up, and I put it in my open hand, and I raced to the back. And when I got to the back, it was very dark back there. It was just a couple of like shadowy kind of lights. And Flair said, "What the hell are you doing here?" And I said to him, "Rick, I've got Mick's ear in my hand." He said, "What?" I said, "I've got Mick's ear in my hand." He said, Are you feeling all right?" I said to him, "Rick," I said, "I never come back here. Look, I know." So he takes me by the arm and pulls me to underneath one of these lights that are in the back, and he looks at it, and he said, "Holy shit, that's a human ear." I said, "I know it is. Come here, guys, take a look." And the locker room empties out, and the guys are around my hand looking at the ear. And I said to them, and Sting was, he was like incredibly mesmerized by this. And so I started to move because I needed to. I said, "Where's the doctor?" Because the doctor would have the ice. And they didn't know. So I started walking down the hall, and they're all following me, staring at the ear. And finally, the doctor was in the very last room. And I told him, "This is a human ear. It needs to go on ice." He put it on ice, and now the match is continuing in the ring. So I'm hustling to get back to the ring, and as I'm walking in the back, the match had ended. Foley is walking toward me, and he has his hand over where his ear used to be, and he just neither of us stopped walking as we walked past each other, but he just looked at me and said, "Bang, bang, my ear is gone." It was so, like, very strange, very, very strange. And then he wanted to bring his ear home with him to the States, because they obviously weren't successful in reattaching it, but they wouldn't let him do that. There was a nurse who just, you know, those metal waste baskets with a pedal, and the lid comes up. She says, "No, you can't have it." She steps on the pedal, the lid comes up, she throws it in, and boom, it's gone. That's the story I thought you were going to ask me about.
Well, that was much more interesting.
I think that's a better story.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a better story than the Shockmaster, that's for sure.
All right, our next question, and Gary, you can just hit this with one-word answers if you want. But Matt Souza, what's your favorite event of all time and your favorite match of all time?
I guess my favorite. Oh, when you say event, you mean like a pay-per-view?
Or he just says wrestling event. So yeah, I guess pay-per-view or just any major event that you look fondly back on.
Yeah, I'd say Great American Bash with the Triple Tower of Doom, and I think it was the Rock and Roll in the Midnight, and that event in Baltimore. It was fun. I think it was not a good conclusion to the Flair Luger match, which was the main event, if I remember correctly. Because it would stop because of blood, and it really wasn't bleeding.
Yeah. No, the Starrcade match they had that year I thought was better between the two of them. So.
Right, and that's not from taking a look at it as a wrestling purist. I'm just talking about my favorite.
Right.
Fun.
Yeah.
Right.
Enjoyed that.
Okay. Let's see. All right, here's kind of a longer answer. Brett Wolverton states, does it bother you that on WWE Classics On Demand, your introductions are dubbed over by a poor impersonator in instances where entrance music is changed to generic music? Also, were you ever approached by WWE about redoing the introductions for any of the WCW shows to air on demand or elsewhere? And he also adds, he's a huge fan, and your announcing style heavily influenced his style of announcing. It would be an awesome honor to have an idol like you announcing me. That's what he says.
Very nice.
It is. So.
No, it doesn't bother me. I don't think it's personal because it's probably a copyright infringement with the music.
Mm-hmm.
And no, they've never. I'm sorry, this is going to be a short answer, but no, they've never called me. But I don't think they ever would.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. See, I don't know how involved Vinny is with the production of things, or I don't. I think that the people that are working in production probably don't know who I am. They probably have very little relation to know. I don't know. I just don't. I think they're just so removed that I would never expect them to do that. They probably think I'm dead. These are from the 70s, so they probably think that I'm dead.
Oh, God.
Well, hopefully they listen to the show and they realize you're not. So.
Yes, exactly.
All right, and finally, our final question comes from Brian Samick. What event did you feel the guys in the back were the most nervous for when you were announcing?
That the guys in the back were the most nervous for.
So I guess a major event or something going down where the backstage they felt maybe a lot riding on it. They were nervous for the show.
Mm.
I don't think that ever happened. I don't. No, if there was any nervousness whenever there was any nervousness in the back, it would have been because of how unsettled management was. Had more to do with business and who was going to be let go, or
right. Okay.
Yeah, but these guys were like true professionals, and even though it was so tense and hyped out in the ring, they were really relaxed in the back because they knew exactly what they were doing. No, I don't remember that ever being the case.
Okay, and I have one last question before we wrap up. Have you ever crossed paths with the immortal Dennis Stamp?
Oh, God.
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. I had to ask.
Unless, maybe I shouldn't even, unless he was brought in as like an enhancement guy or job guy, I guess that's possible that would have happened.
Okay. Well, he probably wasn't booked. Okay.
Yeah, he was not.
Yeah, so,
No.
We want to thank you, Gary, for joining us here tonight. This trip through wrestling history and your career was phenomenal. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time. We really appreciate it. And anyone out there who wants to learn more about Gary's career, please check out his book, Body Slams. It is a tremendous read. To me, it was one of the first really good books that came out. The Mick Foley book kind of got things rolling as far as mainstream goes, but your book was really one of the first ones that was really just introspective of the business, especially during a time period a lot of fans maybe growing up a little bit later weren't aware of, the early 80s and late 70s. So definitely check that out. And, of course, we want to thank Graham as well for joining us, as always, to help steer this interview. We had a great time, Gary. Thank you so much.
Thanks. I had a good time, too. Appreciate it.
All right, PTB Nation, we'll be back next week with our headlines as usual, and then we'll be reviewing In Your House 6, and I think Graham may be joining us for the show after that, for WrestleMania 12. We'll see. But with all that said, thank you so much for listening, PTB Nation. We'll talk to you later. For Sky Criscolo, Graham Cawthon, and Gary Michael Cappetta, I am Justin Rosero. Thank you for listening.
Good night, PTB.